Anchor Nompumelelo Siziba. She joins us live from Parliament. Nompu, good afternoon to you. So Minister Gigaba to present his first budget today, and speculation is, dare I say it, possibly his last. And so far as this budget goes, it's not going to be an easy one, is it?
No, it's not. It's going to be a serious tightrope for him. On the one hand, he has to impress the ratings agencies and international investors, and on the other hand, he has to obviously satisfy South Africans, put some more money in their pockets, and better provide in the area of health, education, security, and all of those lovely things that are basic human rights. He also has to address the issue of state capture, what's going to happen in terms of reining that in and controlling spending within government. Government is supposedly looking to cut expenditure by about 25 billion rand. And it's seeking to raise taxes to the tune of about 15 billion rand. But it may well be that those numbers rise, given the fact that our revenue shortfall is in excess of 50 billion rand. So very interesting budget yet to come, going to be a real challenge for him, I'm sure. But in the meantime, I'm joined by Mr. Lawson Anaidu. He's Executive Director at the Council for the Advancement of the South African Institution. Thanks very much for joining us, Lawson.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. Now, we've had the political transition that President Cyril Ramaphosa kept on referring to. It's taken place. So from a constitutional perspective, where to next for South Africa?
Well, I think we must bear in mind that this administration of President Ramaphosa is less than a week old. So the transition is ongoing. And I think this budget is going to be a part of that transition and will hopefully give us signals as to what to expect from this government going forward. But we must also, having said that, remember that this budget has been in preparation since the middle of last year. So it's been prepared for a long time. You know, the government departments and treasury officials have been working hard on the numbers for a long period of time. So I don't think there are going to be any major surprises in the budget today. We know, as you said, the deficit for this year is around 50 billion rands. Predicted for next year for 70 billion rands for 2019. So these are holes that the Minister of Finance is going to need to plug by, on the one hand, raising revenue, on the other hand, trying to shrink expenditure without impacting on the poor, without impacting on infrastructure delivery, issues around NHI, as you've mentioned already. So it's a very delicate balancing act that the Minister is going to have to engage in this afternoon.
You're jumping the gun a bit, but I'll ask the question nonetheless. But what constitutional issues or fundamentals should underpin the delivery of a budget?
Well, it's about serving our people. I mean, that's essentially what this is about. It's a message that I think has been emphasized over and over again by President Ramaphosa in his SONA speech on Friday, in his reply to the House yesterday, about this is about ordinary people. It's not about people on the red carpet, it's about people sleeping on the benches outside of Parliament. And that's what this budget needs to address, is the plight of the poor and the marginalized in our society. How is it that we're going to be able to improve their lives, not just next week, but over the medium and long term? So this is going to be a budget that looks forward.
Now, in terms of that very issue, how does the minister strike the balance between, on the one hand, serving the interests of South Africa Inc., all the stakeholders within it, while at the same time ticking the boxes in terms of international investors finding South Africa attractive and the ratings agencies not downgrading us further?
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, there are some difficult choices to be made, but I think the reality is that we need to be able to send strong signals to the international investor community, for example, that there's policy certainty, that this government knows where it's going from an economic policy perspective. It's got a plan going forward. And for South Africans to recognize that we're in a hole. We have a budget deficit of 50 billion, and we all have to dip our hands in our pockets to the extent that we can to help with that. So, you know, whether it's a question of raising taxes, it's got to be done, but it's got to be done in a way that is socially equitable, if you like.
Indeed. And then you've been very vocal and active in the courts on this whole issue of state capture, and there's a lot of pressure on President Ramaphosa to adjust his cabinet, as some people are deemed not fit to be in there because they're accused of being involved in state capture. From your perspective, how urgent is that particular issue?
I think it's extremely urgent because, again, it sends the signals to South Africans that this administration is serious about dealing with state capture. So I think we can expect to see a cabinet reshuffle early next week, probably. And I think many people will want to see some of those key architects and people who've been involved in allegations of state capture being removed from cabinet at the earliest opportunity. I know the President has spoken about reconstituting, reconfiguring cabinet, which is going to take a longer period, but in the short period I think he needs to cut those ministers who have been involved in allegations of state capture, cut the size of the number of deputy ministers, which can be done very simply without changing the structure of government departments. So those, I think, are some of the low-hanging fruit that the Minister of Finance and the President together can grasp quite quickly.
Less an economic question, but more around the Constitution and that court case that where it was decided that Mr. Ramaphosa should actually remove Sean Abrahams, and that hasn't done. I'm sure the deadline has been way exceeded. What are your thoughts on this issue? Well,
that matter is actually going to the Constitutional Court next Wednesday, a week from today, for a confirmation hearing to confirm the judgment of the High Court that the removal from office of Mr. Nkasana was unlawful, that the appointment of Mr. Abrams was therefore also unlawful, and only after next week Constitutional Court hearing and judgment will President Ramaphosa be able to act and appoint a new national director. So we're hoping that that can all happen quite quickly, so that the charges ultimately against President Zuma can be reinstated by a national director in which all South Africans have trust.
Thank you very much, sir, for your time. That was Lawson Naidoo. He's Executive Director at the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. It's back to you, Natasha.
Nompu, thanks so much, and we'll get more from Nompu, who is at Parliament for us ahead of the budget, with more guests and analysis for you that's coming up.